Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Jeff Stewart Dixon. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Rick.
And Jeff wrote a book called 21 Days, A Guide for Spiritual Beginners, which I read and enjoyed. Very sort of down-to-earth, entertaining story about his own spiritual odyssey, intermixed with raising a son, fishing, and taking lots of naps.
Yeah, right.
Sounds like a pretty good life to me.
Well, it's a book. It's what can I say?
Yeah. So I think you mentioned that you called it 21 days because it represents 21 days in your life. Although, as I read it, I somehow got the impression that it spanned a larger time span. So explain that or run us through what you'd like to say about it.
Sure. So essentially, 21 days is there are 21 chapters, and each chapter is a day.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a period where, in my own awakening process, that I passed through, for me, was a very important doorway. And I knew that what had happened was important to the extent that I felt like I wanted to write about it. And so I immediately started keeping a journal. So I kept it after this one episode. I kept a journal for 21 days of everything that happened to me. What's it like to get up in the morning and go to work, start your day, have a family, social life, as you said before, fishing, yes, and naps. And my son takes more naps than I do. It wasn't just about me taking the naps.
Yeah, but I got the impression that sometimes you use those as an opportunity for you to take one too, which I would do as well.
Well, sure. You're the first person who said, "Damn, Jeff, you get a lot of naps now, too." I have to go and look at that and see that. But so the 21 days are. I want to convey what the kind of the peak experience side of awakening is like, again, on a very just ordinary level. And so what I found is that it was all too ordinary. And so I didn't end up using every single one of those days that I kept a journal with. I actually went back into my own seeking history, and I selected 7 what I thought were archetypal days that that would be relatable for everyone. In other words, those were days that I went through in my own awakening, seeking process that I thought were pretty important. And drawing a big picture here, and it's black and white, and there's more subtlety to it, of course. But I thought, well, these are pretty important days, and if people are going to get involved with these matters, they're probably, in one respect or another, going to bump into days just like this.
Mm-hmm.
So the 21 days are those. There are also a few days where I felt like I wanted to have a little story or an analogy. So I think it's 3 or 4 days where I just wrote a little parable, a spiritual parable, just to break the book up and to make it more interesting and more palpable over the course of the 21 chapters and the days. I didn't want it to be the same thing day in and day out, because frankly, as everyone knows, as we all know, in our lives, there's a lot of repetition that goes on no matter what. So I wanted to get away from that in the book and have it be at least somewhat interesting. So
Okay.
does that answer the...
Yeah. Now, I'd be interested in knowing, how and when and you went through that doorway
Uh-huh.
and what led up to it. I mean, when I read
Sure.
the book, you didn't chronicle a lot of detail about years of spiritual seeking, at least as
Right.
I gathered it. I mean, the main thing
Right.
I caught was a trip to California, which might not have been more than 48 hours, in which you ran into Gangaji and Adida and some mysterious couple whom I couldn't identify. But, you didn't sort of go through years of, I sat on my Zen cushion and did this,
Right.
and,
Have no cushion.
right. So let's do a little bit of a chronology, if we may.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm 43, and really my spiritual search began when I was about 18. And in the first 5 years, let's say, I was interested, much like all of us are, in kind of the outward expression of, or the more surface levels of spirituality. Out-of-body experiences, psychic phenomenon, 2012, crystals, et cetera, et cetera. And I went to the Monroe Institute, great place. It's here in Virginia. They facilitate using Hemisync out-of-body experiences. And those first 5 years were important in that I needed to prove to myself that there was something to this thing called
Realm,
spirituality, yeah,
right?
to this realm, to religion, really. Because when I was in college, I was just agnostic atheist, and had what I would call a pretty, practical and logical head on my shoulders. And so I wasn't just going to willy-nilly, tell me that's, have someone tell me that my chakras could be balanced with crystals because that's the way it was. I wanted proof. And so Monroe Institute offered proof. And I followed their program, and I had some out-of-body experiences, and I was like, okay, well, this is real. After that is when I slowly gravitated towards more Advaita Zen teachers, and my seeking shifted it shifted away from having an experience to something that was bigger, more fulfilling, and answered for me personally what was what I found was the real root of the reason I got involved with spirituality was my own existential depression.
So when you say away from having experiences, you mean away from having a specific experience where you're going out of your body
Right.
and then it's over, and the next day you wake up and you have to
Right.
you're talking about some kind of deeper, more sustained realization that you decided was relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, honestly, it wasn't even I wanted some, I never ever wanted Golden Buddha, one with the universe mountaintop enlightenment. I wasn't seeking that. I just was unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said before, the term that I always like to use is I was existentially depressed. And I wanted that to go away, damn it,
Was it a pretty persistent unhappiness? I mean,
Absolutely.
a little
Yeah.
cloud over your head most of the time.
Absolutely.
Eh,
What the funny thing about it though was that unless I told you, you would never have known it.
right.
In all those years, with the exception of family and close friends, I came off as pretty down to earth, normal guy, with no big hang-ups or problems. But inside, down deep, um, I felt that. And back to my seeking history, this is the second 5 years I bumped into Adi Da, Way of the Heart, and started reading his material and watching his videos. And I did sit with him in person a few times. And that really just changed my whole orientation towards spirituality. It actually softened me up, pulverized, pounded me, and really made me aware, self-aware of the mind, of ego, of all of the machinations that make up the realm of Maya that we're easily caught in.
Was it the
And
sitting with him that did that, or
no,
more just the reading of the books?
it was reading of the books. There were a few occasions where I read his books and crossed a threshold. I was like, oh shit. I can't go back now. I now know this about myself, and there is there's no turning around at this point. So, yeah, there's a level of seriousness that one really needs to take on in order to, in my opinion, to truly wake up. And eventually, at one point or another, um, you're you need to become aware of what it is that your own mind is up to, and that process of becoming aware of that is actually heartbreaking.
Mm.
It really, for me, it was a moment of coming into the understanding that, boy, this mechanism that's going on up here just doesn't really work like I thought it worked, and it is failing me all the time. And so that was heartbreaking when you first bump into that. And that's part of the process of the awakening process is your heart wakes up, you become more vulnerable to your own limitations. And so
It's
good
funny,
news and bad.
yeah, right. I mean, to me, the word disillusionment has a positive connotation,
Right, right,
because you want to get out of illusion, and so disillusionment, although it can be painful, is
right.
actually a step in the right direction more often than not.
Regression in the service of transcendence. That's a great quote by an author named Michael Washburn. He's a transpersonal psychologist.
Hmm.
And reading that was so beneficial for me because it actually, and it's why I liked the term. Well, I liked those terms, but I also like the term existential depression because that term takes it out of the realm of me being responsible for it. Like I was like screwed up or something I did or something my family did or my parents or life or or circumstances. It was just saying existential depression for me just put it in the realm of nature, of existence, and of that's just part of what's happening here, and get over it, and you're not responsible, and so these are the rules of the game and proceed from there. So that knowing that helped me a lot. um,
Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, if you had been totally satisfied with the status quo, you might we might see that as an actual lesser developed state than being depressed with the status quo and
right,
realizing that there's got to be something more
right.
or better.
Yeah, I think all of the great teachings take you through the dark night of the soul,
Hmm.
or at least say, hey, go down this, this way there be dragons, and you have to go through that.
Yeah.
There's no, I know that I wasn't interested in yeah, popsicles and ice cream cones and candy and light effused angels. I quickly understood that we had to go through that dark element of one's soul to uh, to to get through the other side.
Hmm.
Um, so that's what I did, and Adidas introduced me to that. So back to again, my seeking history. Then I discovered great thing happened around the early 1990s. All sorts of awakening teachers started coming out of the woodwork. Um, and so the last 10, if you could look at my total seeking history, which has been about 20 years, the last 10 years of that were involved in many, many sittings, in many, many circumstances of me getting on airplanes and flying to California or inviting teachers to my homes. And once I realized that I could get there's even a chapter in my book where like for the low, low price of, Ming's Oriental Diner, when I went out to California, I was sitting with an awakened gentleman who was giving me his private time for nothing. And then the next day, I go off and sit with Adi Da, and all the loopholes and things that I had to jump through and to get to sit with Adi Da. And here I could get it for free. His name was Phil Servideo, sitting with Phil, and it's like, I think I'm going to choose that. It's a little easier.
Mm.
And
Hey, you
I
had to
love,
start doing an interview show. You not only get to talk to people for a couple hours a week, but they send you free books.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you probably have 10,000 at this point in the history of Awakening United States, Rick. You probably have gathered some 10,000 books because we're coming out of the woodwork. Um, so that's what I did, and those teachers, Gangaji, and these are all teachers I sat with, and I didn't necessarily shake their hand, but I was in close proximity to them. Gangaji, Eli Jackson Bear, um, Francis Lucille, Andrew Cohen, a student of Gangaji's named Solane, Michael Regan, um, uh, yeah, Arjuna Nick Ardaw. I'm not going to keep going down the list, but yeah, I spent quite a number of years
Did
chasing
you
those guys around
did
and
you ever
sitting.
wonder whether you might be a bit of a dilettante jumping around from one to the other,
I
as
was totally
opposed?
Yeah, I was totally a whore. Yeah, absolutely. I had this little black book, and I was just like, yeah, whoever's gonna, I don't want to, I didn't care, and that's a little different about my seeking history as opposed to others. Is that I never wanted to join the club. I just couldn't do, even with Adi Da. I was a friend. They had this organizational setup, and that was kind of the least involvement you can have. I didn't tithe. I didn't do any of that. I didn't, and I was not interested in the cult vibe, and so joining any club was not my cup of tea. Um, Fortunately, most of these teachers, Gangaji and Samuel Bonder, whom I did not mention before, um, who I also have had sat with and did a lot of great programs with. Um, they weren't asking you to join their club.
Yeah.
They weren't. It had progressed from guru on throne to, hey man, I'm taking this throne and I'm throwing it away and I'm going to sit down in the audience with you, and that was just awesome.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. Is I took that invitation to heart and I sat with all of them. And what I saw and got out of it was that they're all, in a sense, there's this process, and I've whittled it down when I'm communicating to people about it, that you get when you sit with teachers like that. There's three things that you're trying to do, and that's you're trying to get a grip on self-awareness, self-acceptance, and then what I call transference, which is just sitting with the vibe of the teacher and picking up on it. So there were teachers I sat with I just plain didn't like. I just did not like them, but I knew that I was still getting something good out of it. It was still good medicine, so I just did that and sat with as many teachers as I possibly could. So.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The next Buddha is the Sangha. You've probably heard that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the truth of that is happening. Would you like me to, for people who are watching this, to explain specifically kind of what happened in my own awakening process?
Yeah, I'm sure that would be interesting. Let's do it.
Oh, okay. Um, so which is kind of leads up to those 21 days that I spoke of. In my own instance, it was in 2004 that I had my first awakening experience, where actually just was with my wife. We were swimming at some quarry out in West Virginia near my parents' house, and I just started feeling very, very strange. And then within about an hour, I ballooned into a state that normally took me sitting with satsang teachers about, well, I should say, within a few minutes, I ballooned into this state that normally would take me half an hour to an hour sitting with satsang teachers.
Let me just interject a question here.
Yeah,
When you weren't sitting with teachers, which
yeah.
obviously you weren't most of the time, did you have like a daily practice of any kind that you would do?
No, I had been so that the notion of doing something or making any repetitive efforts ruined any of me doing any of that.
All right, so mainly you just like lived your life as a normal guy, and then
Yeah,
when you got the chance, you sat with teachers,
exactly.
and
And I
and
would,
and sitting
yep,
with them shifted your awareness.
yeah,
Yeah.
sitting with them shifted my awareness. And yeah, no Zen pillow, no meditating for 3 hours first thing in the morning, no yoga practice, no drugs, no prostrations to the guru, none of that.
Okay. So anyway, I interrupted
So
you. Continue on.
yeah, no, that's
You're
yeah,
out swimming in the quarry.
right. And so I'm gonna I'm gonna condense what happened. Essentially, it led the this awakening occurring, and it was shocking. It was uh, not not what I had expected, despite 15 years of seeking and 3,200 volumes of books read and 4 weeks worth of video watched. Here it was, and just blew me away. It was the way that I describe it is it was more of an animal awakening than a spiritual awakening. I returned to my body in a way that I never had before, and I guess uh, I could point to the classical notion of non-separation, of no self, but that was part of it. That wasn't entirely it for me. But what it was for me was I wasn't depressed anymore. I didn't feel like shit anymore. So because I like this whole body well-being returned, and just I think that yeah, it was just, again, as I said before, it was just shocking to discover, oh, this is awakening. Um, so
It's
I had
an
that
awakening, I would say.
an awakening, exactly. So I one of so then what happened is that for about 5 or 6 years I oscillated in and out of that. For the first couple of years after that, I would be in it for, let's say, a month or two out of the year, and then the rest of the year I wouldn't. And I would drop back down to existential depression. I would drop back down to feeling pretty shitty again.
Even more so, perhaps, by contrast with the
Yeah, because
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's like a UFO comes down, takes you off to the far corners of the galaxy, and says, shows you their home planet, and then this fantastic and great, and you're seeing all these wonderful things, and then in about 5 seconds, they drop you back down on the street, back at home.
Yeah, in Hoboken.
Yeah, it's like,
You don't know
so that
what
was
you got till
definitely,
it's gone.
yeah. So
Okay. And so, in other words, you had an awakening, but it wasn't abiding. It was intermittent for 5 years, you said.
right, and then in
Oh, let me
skipping
just
over
ask
the
one more question in here. During those 5 years,
sure.
when it was intermittent, was it alternating, the existential depression with the same quality of awakening, or did the quality of the awakening seem to be growing or getting enhanced as you alternated back and forth between it and ordinary state?
Quality was the same.
Okay.
Whenever I would have an awakening episode, it would be the same, and that is pretty consistent, really, till to this day. I'll detail a little bit about what what awakening is for me today, as opposed to those 5 years. At the end of in 2010, I was reading. I'm going to jump right to the end of my seeking for the last 5 years, which is after my son Jeremy was born. He's 5 years old. I just didn't sit with teachers. I was just done with it. I was like, I'd gotten all that I could. Plus, I was in a circumstance having a small child and a mortgage and a job that I couldn't go gallivanting across the country anymore. So um, I just stopped, and I did a few Skype interviews with a Waking Down teacher named Ted Strauss, and that was about it, really.
I interviewed
Um,
Ted. You may have
yeah,
seen that. Yeah.
yeah, he's a great guy.
Hmm.
And so then in 2010, I was reading a online article by a fellow named Steve Norquist, which apparently this article was pretty popular and made its way around the internet. And I read it, and just damn, it just spoke to me at a time when I guess my fruit was ripe and was ready to drop, and um, it ballooned me immediately into a heightened awakened state. And um, what happened after that was that I felt like, wow, this was extraordinary. And I felt like something was different about it, but I wasn't going to believe it, And so what I did was I started the journal, and said to myself, okay, let's just see how this pans out. And so then, lo and behold, the greatest gift and the greatest thing that panned out of that was that the existential depression was gone, and it has not been, for me, um, that was
It
what the greatest part of
it
the.
just hasn't come back.
It just has not come back. Now, if I could describe, in that moment in Steve Norquist's article, it was about no self and the concept of, and this is and it'd be good to touch upon this for readers, because that's often a very confusing notion. It's like, what is no self? It's talked about quite a bit. And I didn't really get it until I read his article. And for me, the article was very just poignant and ruthless. There's no self. In other words, there's no small self. There's no large self. There's no consciousness, or special place or special part of you that you're separate from, that you think is out there somewhere that you need to get to. In other words, there's no large self out there, and there's no small self. It just collapsed the whole idea of self for me. So there, you're just, what that does is it returns you back to here and now, and to the moment, and to your entire makeup without separation. There's your body, there's mind, there's your energetic being, all of it. But and you're here, and there's nothing else. It's very cut and dry. So I didn't really understand that I was still subtly holding off for some grander notion of awareness or consciousness to flow down into me and give me something that these teachers, I thought that they had. And it wasn't that at all. It was just that I realized that the consciousness that I have, that you have, that everybody has, is the awakened consciousness. And that there's no, the idea of a self, small or large, is just a fantasy made up by the mind. So that again, that was the thing that kind of did it for me. And then after that, no more existential depression. And the cherry on top is that in the awakened state, I get to have these moments like mentioned in my book, where I just call it magic something, where these beautiful, classically, what one could point to as a classical kind of enlightenment moments, where there is no sense of another, there's no sense of being disassociated from environment, of people, life. And I can feel it in my body when this happens. My posture gets better. I feel like I'm walking about 2 feet off the ground. My vision goes to the front of my eyeballs. My senses all get heightened a little bit. My heart basically opens up and expands. And it's a peak experience, and it's part of the awakenings process, but I'm not in that state 100% of the time. And I think that you would be hard-pressed to find any teacher like the ones that you interview that would acknowledge that they're in that heightened state 100% of the time. I think that that's an energetic state, and we go back down to a normal level. And so most of the time, I'm in that normal level. 21 Days, the book that I wrote, is just how happens to be about a good 75-80% of those days where I was in a heightened state, and then 20 or 20%, I should say, was I was just in a normal state. Am I making sense
Yeah,
here?
you are. In my experience, let me see if you agree with this. You know, my heightened state 10 years ago, let's say, is my normal state today. So it doesn't seem heightened anymore.
Right.
And today's heightened state will probably be my normal state 10 years from now. I'm just saying 10 years as a case in point. I
I
don't
like
know.
that idea. That's
Yeah, it's
yeah.
like we get used to stuff,
Right.
and we integrate, we acclimate, we
Yeah.
embody, whatever you want to call it, and the way I see it, there's like this. If you imagine a line that's going upwards, but it kind of fluctuates up and down as it
Right.
goes upwards. That's
Right.
kind of the way it works. If you're on the spiritual path, there's this. You have your ups and downs, but there's a general upward
Right.
trend. If the word upward is
Yeah.
appropriate, you know.
And I wanted to I wanted to in this book, and also I wanted to mention my blog too, which really is about that. My is it okay if I
Yeah, and of
share
course
that?
I'll be linking to anything you want me to link to.
Okay.
But if you want to just mention it, that's fine.
Yeah, sure, because uh, it's important in the sense that I that that people know that this is available out there. That not there's I guess this is the point I'm making, and I have a blog that's called Politically Incorrect Enlightenment, and there is still a little bit, although we've evolved in the way that awakening teachers represent themselves to the world. There's still, as much as I love some of the larger teachers that we mentioned earlier, there's still a little bit of slick sheen that's still there. For instance, if you go sit with one of these individuals with 300 or 400 people, they're still on a pedestal and they got a microphone in front of them. They've got beautiful flowers sitting next to them, and there's a golden curtain behind them. So there's a little bit of a disconnect with who you think that they are and who they are for real. And I really wanted to make it a point in my book and in my blog that my the subtitle of my blog is, if a schmuck like me can wake up, so can you.
Hmm.
And so I kind of wanted to bring the idea of awakening down into the very, very ordinary. And what that does, I think, and I've heard this from people who've visited my blog and have read my book, that it makes by presenting it in such ordinary fashion, it makes it all the more attainable for them. It doesn't seem like some huge, lofty, horrendous, effort that they're going to have to make to get there. Because at the end of the day, I'm not Superman. It's like I'm not some enlightened guru yogi character. I'm a guy who has a mortgage. I get frustrated at my dog. I'm capable. Get this, I'm capable of not liking my neighbors. I have all. It's like that's the element that I paint, is that the ego does not go away. I think that you do transcend the ego, In other words, ego is no longer in the pilot seat. Consciousness, your true nature, conscious awareness is in the pilot seat, and ego's in the co-pilot seat. So it's like I have no problem with ego, and I let it run wild. And on Attaining Pi, politically incorrect enlightenment, I just let it run wild. I let it, be potty mouthed and funny, and try to paint a picture that's a little more down to earth, a little more lighthearted, a little more sarcastic, and um, not so, God, lotus filled pictures on websites and Buddhas and bull, just I'm just so tired of, got so tired of all that. So I wanted there to be just a real nitty gritty explanation of some dude who went through the process and woke up, and I'm not sitting on cloud nine somewhere.
Yeah. Well, that whole what you just said evokes a number of questions in me. One
Mm.
is, if you're speaking to 300 people, you kind of need a podium and a microphone. You don't have to wear robes,
Well, you're
robes, and
right. Yeah,
yeah,
you're right.
unless you're gonna shout. Um,
Yeah.
and but a lot of these guys are very down to earth, like Adyashanti, for instance.
Yeah.
People make a fuss about him, but he's a pretty normal guy. I brought him to my town to
Yeah.
speak, and we had lunch and stuff. And
Yeah.
he had a burger, and mostly we talked about
Yeah.
movies and TV shows we liked, and the fact that he likes to decorate a big Christmas tree at Christmas time, and he told
Right.
us, that kind of stuff. He likes to
Right.
play poker and listen to Frank
Cool.
Sinatra records.
Does he like fishing? I should go fishing with
He
him.
probably would. I don't know. He likes, what he does do is he takes a few weeks off every year and goes hiking in the Sierras and
Mm.
camping and stuff. And
Wow.
and he used to work in a machine shop and be a bicycle racer. I mean, so but you said ego doesn't go away. And
Yeah.
what I think often happens is that because it doesn't go away, the remnants of it get aggrandized by all the attention. In the case of some spiritual teachers, they don't manage to retain their ordinariness, and the whole thing gets really weird. And I
Right.
might reference Adi Da as a case in
Yeah.
point.
Sure. Sure.
you know,
Yeah. Adi Da's definitely a bit of a mystery. I mean, he comes from the era of the 70s where there were the Maharishi Mahesh Yogis and the Oshos,
Muktananda,
and
yeah.
Muktanandas, and that was the platform that they used, and he used that platform, and um, fortunately it's changed, so.
Yeah, for the most part, it has. There's still examples of that. There's still some
I think
big.
that when I'm talking about like the satsang teachers today, you can't help but that to happen. They have to be politically correct when they are talking to 300 or 400 people. Yeah, and they have to use a microphone. So the circumstances set that up essentially. That there's a little bit of that sheen that I spoke of.
Right,
That's
but if they
usually,
allow people to be touching their feet and giving them flowers
yeah. Well, they don't. No, they don't do that.
no, they
Yeah.
don't. But some people do. Some
I
teachers.
guess is that still going on? I don't know. Is
It
it?
depends. I mean, it's usually more of an Indian thing.
Yeah.
And Indian gurus.
I think it's all. I sat with Adi Da. I was able to I had no problem with that. If that was his modus operandi, that's fine. It wasn't. It was, that's not going to be for everybody.
Right.
Not everybody's is suited toward receiving this kind of teaching, in a politically incorrect fashion from a potty-mouthed guy who likes to go fly fishing and drink tequila. They need that. They want, and people need that type of reverence and sacredness. And
Well, I'm
I'm
all
all,
for that.
yeah,
As you're about to say, and I think devotion and reverence and all that can be a very valuable element in one's
yeah,
path. I mean, I love to go to Siama, the hugging
yeah,
saint, a couple
sure,
times a year. I have a picture of her behind me, and there's a lot of that
yeah,
stuff going on around her.
yeah,
And it's, I have a wonderful time, and then I come home and I resume my normal life and interview
right,
ordinary people, and
right,
but there are people who really thrive on that kind of scene, and fine, maybe they won't thrive on it 20 years from now. Maybe they will feel like it was a certain stage in their lives, but if it does it for them now, it's all more power to them.
yeah, yeah. We are at a here we are. What is it? 20 days until December 21st, 2012.
Oh yeah.
And I've written about that on my blog in a funny fashion. But that's what I think it represents more than anything, is that we are now at a point where we don't need the thrones and the gurus. That it's available to individuals that and that are like you and me, Rick, and a lot of the teachers that you have on Bat Gap that
Hmm.
are just way down to earth, and that's an awesome thing that's happened. And that's kind of like that's the age of Aquarius that we're entering into, where this teaching and awakening and information about it is available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year on the internet and through all sorts of teachers, etc. And if anything, because I still know that there are people out there that are, um, they still have a limited belief about enlightenment or awakening, about its attainability,
Right.
and about it being some lofty enterprise, because they still have their information about it is still stuck in the autobiography of a yogi era. And um, that's it's good to speak to those people to let them, you know, to know that awakening, um, albeit not what you think it is, but it is a great thing and it is available to just normal people now. And even my own seeking history, which was 20 years, unfortunately, I think today that if you live in an area where there are a number of teachers and you apply yourself, and don't have too much of a cluttered notion of what awakening or spirituality is about. I'm going out on a limb here, but I would say that from start to finish, you could do this whole thing in a couple of years. Concentrated, but I do think it's possible, and I think that what's happening is that you're starting to see, and this is evidence from your website, a lot of there was the 90s where Papaji flooded the market with a number of teachers that came over, and now what we're seeing is the market getting even more flooded. It's a terrible word to use for what's happening, but our society is getting. That's the business person in me speaking. Sorry. Our society is that now, like I'm like the third or fourth generation of Papaji individuals. I learned from Gangaji and from Cohen and from
Arjuna.
Arjuna, yeah. And now, and it took me a while, and now I'm here, and there's lots of guys like me out there, and gals out there like me, and so that's great. So now what's going to happen is it's going to, go even further. So,
Yeah, no, I like that. And I don't think that it's going to be watered down merely because there are succeeding generations. Um,
right,
and I'd like to offer a proviso, which is that, well, first of all, one of the motivations that caused me to start this whole program is to illustrate just what you said, which is that awakening is a lot more common than people realize, and
right,
it doesn't necessarily have to be the kind of stuff Yogananda talked about, flashy stuff.
right,
And because if
right,
people are fixated on that, then they could spend their whole lifetime looking for something that's never going to happen anyway.
right,
um, and all sorts of people in all sorts of circumstances are having the kinds of awakenings that we're alluding to here.
right,
So there's that. On the other hand, I'd like to sort of play devil's advocate and say that, you said that if you really focus on it, you could do it in 2 years. I think it's an ongoing process, personally, from my experience and my observation, that anybody you talk to, no matter how enlightened they may seem to be, is still has plenty of ground to cover, and and a lot of them realize it, a lot of them don't realize it.
hmm,
Someone just got in touch with me recently whom I had interviewed a year or two ago, and at that point she was like, I'm done, there's nothing to do, and so on. And then she just got in touch again and say, oh, I was so wrong, there's so much more. And I just had all these realizations afterwards. I mean,
yeah.
I have a friend, I'm talking a little bit much here, but this will give you a
No, that's
break.
fine, Rick. Yeah,
I have a friend who is in his mid-60s, lives a very ordinary life, wife, couple of kids, works in a factory as a designer. And he was awakened in the sense that we're talking about back when he was a child, basically, 10, 12, 15 years old. He's been progressing ever since. I took a walk with him recently, and he was describing the nature of his experience. He said, well, well, he's just an ordinary guy. He said, well, I see millions of souls coming in and out of me all the time. I see gods and celestial beings as a routine part of my ordinary experience. I never
Yeah.
lose awareness during sleep. There's this pure inner light that just is a perpetuum.
Mm.
And then we got back to talking about ordinary stuff. We've gone skiing together and just done ordinary things.
Mm.
So I don't want to somehow hang people up with looking for the flash again after everybody's gotten comfortable with the notion that it doesn't have to be flashy. But I want to suggest that
Yeah.
there's no end to it. And
Right.
if you reach what you feel is a platform of clear, absolute realization or something, eventually you're going to be able to see details within that. And you're going to realize
Right.
that sort of flat non-personal absolute is a lively field of all possibilities, and you'll begin to explore those possibilities.
Right. I know what you're talking about, and uh, I guess I'm more of the nature of someone who's arrived to a plane of well-being that I'm okay with, and I was just exhausted from the hike up the mountain,
Yeah.
and I'm resting here.
And that's perfectly good.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. That's
And that's
how
great. Yeah.
yeah. That's really how I feel right now. Is that I'm happy just to not do anything that has any that really is oriented toward seeking or development or growth or expanding this. How that being said, I mean, yeah, I know from experience that sometimes there are subtleties to this process that just happen, and I have felt those. I have felt that this past summer I had an episode around the summer solstice where I felt there's a lot of influx of energy that I really couldn't attribute to anything that I was doing, and I had to like seek outside sources, and I went to some psychics and some body energy work, and I was like, what is going on? And she's like, oh, there's a large amount of energy that is, this, I guess, earth-based energy or whatever that I was really feeling into. And so that was new for me. That was new. And I also don't discount that there are subtleties, and I think once you've come so far down the path, Rick, and that you never get so close-minded to think that, oh, this is it. This is I've reached the finite tippy top of the mountain, and it's just not going to get any more happier or perfected than this, and I have arrived, and I'm totally done.
Well,
No,
yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
glad you're saying that because
yeah,
I have people email me saying just
yeah,
that. I'm totally
yeah,
awakened and there's nothing more. And I
right,
always say, okay, wait and see.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they might wait for a lifetime. They might wait for decades.
But I
But
will
but
say, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, you continue. I made the point.
Uh, it's I will say that if you want to wake up, well then yeah, there is a point where you have to say, God damn it, this is what I want.
Yeah, yeah.
And you put your foot down and you say, this is not good enough for me. This is, whatever I'm feeling is not good enough, and I want this to resolve itself, and you want results. And you want to cross the threshold, and you want to arrive to a point where you're like, yes, I had that for years with these teachers. I was like, what is it that they have that I don't have that allows them to sit there and give satsang or say that they're awake, to write books, etc. And that was also a very, it was a very good litmus test, and a point that I kept with me as that whole time. As I wanted that. I wanted to, like, I wanted results. I wanted to feel like, that, again, not necessarily some grand super duper enlightenment or anything, but I wanted to feel better. I wanted to feel okay. I wanted the existential depression to go away. So you do, absolutely. Don't get to thinking that there's some wimpy part of this that that you can just float along and this thing's going to happen to you. There's definitely an applied amount of energy and effort and longing that needs to be had during the awakening enlightenment process. And you got to put that thing to the grindstone. You
Hmm.
got to let it just chew you up, and it's uncomfortable. But I did that, and this is there's a this is a something I'm fond of saying is that in order to transcend the ego, you have to have an ego big enough to think you can actually transcend it. And so yeah, so I felt that I was just like I wasn't I had no problem with the the fact that this is what I wanted and I'm gonna go for it, damn it. And so that applied pressure in the uh, in the crucible of the awakening process
Yeah.
was important for me.
Yeah, well, Patanjali, the author of the Yoga Sutras, talks
Mm.
about yogis with vehement intensity as being those who realize the
Yeah,
quickest. But then on the other
right.
hand, when he outlines the characteristics of awakening, santosh is one of them, which means contentment. So at a certain point, contentment dawns, which in
Yeah,
my experience kind of dissolves that vehement intensity. You're no longer beating
yeah,
yourself over the head or whatever,
it
and
does.
you're perfectly content with the way things are. That
Yeah,
doesn't mean that there couldn't be further growth, but it's on
yeah,
the kind of foundation of, no more existential depression.
right. Yeah, I don't have. I mean, there's two sides to that coin. I don't have an intensity that manifests itself as me wanting to get something or seeking.
Not
Uh,
anymore, but you used to. I mean, you
I
were
used,
traveling all over the place and reading all this stuff, and
yeah, absolutely. But once, yeah, again, I wanted to cross that threshold, and I did. And so now all that really remains is there's an intensity of life that comes with awakening, where like you're this. I think what happens is that you become more vulnerable and volatile and intense with just your whole being. In other words, if I get emotional or mad about something, damn it, I'm mad,
mm-hmm.
or if in other words, there's no holding back.
Right, right.
I'm not denying any of the parts of my personality or being or whatever. I'm just like intense about it. Like for instance, here's a good one for people that I think would understand. I have desires. I want to make money. I want to manifest for my family and for my life, everything that I possibly can. I'm not in denial of that. I don't want to be poor. I don't want to, I want to have a roof over my head. So I have there's a sort of intensity where I'm not in denial of any of those elements of life either, where I want all of those, want. It's like, well, you should not be wanting anything. You're free of all desire and want. It's
Yeah,
like,
you're not a recluse.
yeah, I'm
And
like,
even if he were a recluse, recluse
yeah,
wants food and he wants a certain amount of
yeah,
shelter, and they
exactly.
minimize their desires, but I don't think it's possible to live without them. If you
Right,
put a muzzle over his mouth, he's going to want air real bad pretty soon.
right. Yeah, that's damn true. So I mean, there's that. That's a good. And what helped me? Here's this is into another seg, which I think would be good. What helped me all those years with my intimate contact with awakened teachers, very
Yeah.
important, was that a I'm picking up subtly in some unknown, mysterious way on their transmission and on their transference, as I called it earlier. Very, very important. It's like there's a Napoleon Hill had a quote from some of the who wrote Think and Grow Rich. What was that in the 30s or something about all of these characters that he wrote about, Henry Ford included. They subscribe to that. If you want to like be in that club, you need to hang out with people in that club.
Hmm.
Um, and you pick up on their subtleties, on their the way that they hold themselves, the way that they speak, the way that they interact with it. It's like your subconscious slowly over time picks up on that. And
Yeah.
then like in my own case, what happens is it finally just clicks. It finally clicks for you that your body gets it. And so I have found that interaction with teachers was very, very important. But uh, the, what did it for me though was and this is part B of it, was that I got to meet them at the airport and take them to my home when Solanay and Michael Regan and a couple, and Arjuna actually, I did a workshop with him where I got to see the nitty gritty about them.
Hmm.
They weren't perfect. I'm talking like cigarettes, and curse words and, and all these imperfections. And it's like, wow, you mean, I don't have to perfect myself in order to do this, It's like, no. And so getting I in that contact with them, I was really able to see, wow, if they can do it, they're just normal people, then I can do it too. So those two elements, that subtle transference and then hanging out with them over time, um, and with and that could be reading a book or satsang, meditating, or having a really deep, intimate conversation with them. That is what made the whole alchemical process of awakening occur for me. And I think that that's what's essentially happening, at least among the Advaita non-dual Zen teachers, which seem to be primarily what you have on Batgap. I think that's the process that they're involved in, is that mysterious process of transference where you're with the teacher, because none of them are prescribing a 10-step program to get from point A to point B to do awakening. There's not a yoga path that you're taking or some intense 3-hour meditation. Most of their process is about intimate, deep conversation, acceptance, self-awareness, and then that magical process of just being with the teacher. So.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely a practice, not a practice. It's definitely a viable method of awakening. Is the proximity with the enlightened. In fact, the ancient scriptures say that they count the company of the enlightened, or the so-called, as being one of the most important things you can do for awakening. And I think that, as you said, there is a sort of a subtle actual mechanics to it going on that probably involves the nervous system and the subtle aspects of the nervous system and everything else. There's a kind of a transference or an attunement or an entrainment or a transmission or whatever you want to call it. And
I see that.
On the other hand, there are techniques and practices that one can do totally on one's own that can accomplish the same thing if the proximity of a teacher is not available. Even reading books like you did had a profound effect. That can have an influence, and there are meditation practices one can do, and all kinds of things. So there are many ways to pull a table across the room, or at least 4. You grab any one of its legs, and all the other legs are going to come along. So that's just my take on it. That let's not get fundamentalist and say it has to be this way. There's a whole potpourri of things that can.
There are, and you are absolutely correct about it. There's all sorts of modalities that you can undergo to facilitate, for instance, developing self-awareness or developing bodily, physical health and attunement, which is not separate from this course. It's just that every individual has their, in moving that table, as you said, across the room, I was like, what can I do that I can just touch it and it moves a whole bunch of feet, that it like slides across the ice, and that's what I wanted was that. And for me, that was, damn, that's all I got to do is show up. So that was it for me. But you are correct. There are a lot of modalities that assist people in that process. That was just my cup of tea. And it did the trick for me.
I think it does the trick for a lot of people. And and on the ordinariness point, it's funny. I was out at the Science and Non-Duality Conference in California about a month ago, and I sat down at breakfast with my friend Igor Kufayev, whom I've interviewed, and we sat down with this guy, and he said, "Whoa," I said, "I feel like I'm with a couple of movie stars." I said, "Come off it, man." I said, everybody poops. Everybody. we're just.
I don't actually.
You managed.
Yeah, when I woke up, I actually stopped
converted into pure soma, right? I said, it's just because you've seen us on the internet, and a lot of people have. It doesn't mean we're like special or something. Just we're just ordinary guys. So there is that kind of like it's a human tendency, I guess, for people to want to glamorize. These characters, and we see it all the time with Justin Bieber and Lindsay Lohan, and so much of the news cycle is made up of talking about these people who are really just ordinary folks that happen to have come to some more mass publicity.
Yeah, which is again why like I think we're seeing a time where there's more teachers who aren't doing that, who are specifically bringing it a little more down to earth and a little bit more real. But you can't escape. It's like I had somebody gripe about the fact that, just in general, that my website is called Politically Incorrect Enlightenment, and that I had attained to something. Well, you've got to advertise. You've got to market yourself. You have to like get the word out.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
And yeah, and if that gets, I will settle for a little sensationalism there. I will settle for a little bit of, you know, I'm not sure exaggeration is the term here, but a little bit of flamboyance in order to get people's attention. And a lot of times you have to. This was something that uh, was said to me over this past summer that I thought was really true. A lot of times you have to get people in the door, in order to give them what they need, you have to speak to them and give them what they want at first. And then once they've gotten that, then you can give them what they need. And I have found that there's no way I could have done, I like having a website called Politically Incorrect Enlightenment. Do I go around telling my friends and family that I'm enlightened? Hell no. Like, that word is just ridiculous in our days. But I gotta use it. You gotta use that word.
Yeah,
You know?
you just need to qualify it a bit, and,
Yeah.
and kind of divest it of its superlative, static,
Right.
lofty connotations.
Right. Yeah. And there's no. I have another website that I'm doing that is I'm next year. I'm gonna begin marketing and advertising for a consulting service that's I'm calling Enlightenment Consulting Services. So I have to use that. I have to use that uh, term so that people will know what I'm talking about. And then, as you said, then you kind of bring it down to, you bring it back down to earth and tell people, okay, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the golden Buddha thing.
Well, if you're really going to be helpful to people,
Right.
then you have to bring it to you don't need to dumb it down, but you need to bring it to a level of understand. You have to
Yeah.
kind of make it understood that it's something that's attainable for them. It's not like
Right.
light years
Right.
beyond them. Yeah.
Right.
You
Well,
know this.
I mean, I think, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to change the subject. You continue.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that's, that was the approach in my book too, where I wanted, I didn't use, as you know, I didn't use any spiritual, religious, psychological vernacular in my book,
Hmm.
because I just couldn't do it. I just was like, I think there's enough books out there about enlightenment or awakening that point to this. So that word is not in the book. Enlightenment or awakening is not in the book. And I just simply described it from an emotional body-based point of view of what this thing is like.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that does, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that does help people a lot to hear it in a different language. And but I can't market a book called 21 Days, a Guide for Spiritual Beginners, without using the word awakening or enlightenment. So,
Sure.
you know.
I was going to bring up the topic of ego a little bit more because at one
Sure.
point you were saying, you read this book that had a profound influence on you, in which the guy really drove it home that there is no personal self.
Right.
And on the other hand, a little bit later you were saying, well, yeah, but we all have an ego, and maybe I don't like my neighbors, or this
Yeah.
or that. So how do you reconcile those two concepts? And
Of no
let me
self.
throw another question in here.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, maybe this ego that we still have is not what you mean by self, but I mean, it's
Mm.
say, God forbid your son should get hit by a car or something like that. There would be a lot of anguish there.
Sure.
There wouldn't be like, oh well, he didn't have a self anyway, and neither do I. So it's just all the unfolding of the cosmic,
Right.
play. There'd be
Right.
a personal crisis. Would
Right.
there not, despite the fact? So how do you reconcile that with the notion that there's no self?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a mysterious juxtaposition between the concept of no self and self. And how can you have two? And the way that I found it personally easiest to reconcile is to take it out of the realm of when you say no self and ego. Those are couching it in some nebulous terms, some verbal term. So for me, let's look at it from a brain function. There's a great book by My Stroke of Insight. You know that book?
Oh, yeah, the lady who had the stroke.
Jill Bolt Taylor. Jill
Right,
Bolt Taylor.
right.
So she yeah, it's a great book. And it's a brain function. So essentially what we're talking about, I mean, and this is black and white, and I'm no neurosurgeon, but if one asks me about awakening, no self, and all those concepts, there is a quality to awakening that I feel is similar to the left brain and right brain, where you could point to your creative right brain, amorphous, general, open-ended qualities of the right brain as no self. And then the controlling, specific, separating, identifying parts of the left brain are the sort of like the ego parts. And so before awakening, again, very black and white here, the left brain is more dominant, and the right brain has the let's see, is second in command. And kind of after awakening, those two things sort of flip. So me personally, I'm not trying to reconcile. That's what ends with awakening. I'm not trying to reconcile what is no self, what is ego, it's like you don't give a shit. It kind of like all collapses. And you realize that there's no separation because there is no self. It's just like you stop even trying to figure out what is ego and there's no denying any of it. It is a, what's the word I want to use? There's a contradiction. It's a mysterious contradiction, and you do kind of get, it's a paradox. There's a damn word I was looking for.
Yep.
It's a paradox. Like how can I feel like one part of my nature is empty and selfless and is conscious awareness and has, nothing is pure and clean and whatever. How can I feel that? But at the same time, there's a part of me that is a stubborn, grumpy son of a bitch.
Yeah.
I don't know. It is a bit of a paradox. And so I just throw the paradox out and I say, okay, left brain, right brain, here's what's happening, and that was how I kind of like reconciled those two ideas. Does that answer the question?
Very well, actually.
Okay.
I love the word paradox. I think juxtaposition is also a good word.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it really breaks down to left brain, right brain. I don't know if that's what's going on in the physiology to account for this sense of there simultaneously being a self and no self and who's in control and all that. It could be much more sophisticated than
it is. Yeah, I'm
neither of us are neurophysiologists. But, here's a good example that I like to use. Let's say I have this pen here, right? And it's a pen. It's plastic and rubber and ink and stuff. But a physicist would tell us that on some level there is no pen here. It's all just sort of virtual fluctuations and probabilities and whatnot. There's no physical thing. And that's probably ultimately the more true reality of the situation. But practically speaking, we see a pen, we use a pen, and the most enlightened person that ever lived is still going to see a pen and perhaps be able to use it. So from my perspective these days, this whole awakening enlightenment game boils down to expanding the range of one's perspective, or having it be expanded or whatever, to incorporate paradoxical juxtapositional realities, so you can simultaneously say, there is a mountain and there is no mountain.
I'm an advocate for the pen. Yeah. I'm an advocate for the mountain. I'm not.
And you're an advocate for there is a Jeff Dixon who wants to make money and raise his family, his son properly and all. But on another level, in your experience, there isn't a Jeff Dixon, right?
Right. Yeah. I'd have to say that the practicalities of being in this world, body and mind, that's what I'm an advocate for. However, my heart, who am I? What is really going on? Yes, it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
And it is dominant.
Right.
And this is what you work at when you get into the awakening business is how can you make that dominant? How can you make that be there all the time? So yes, there is a despite the Jeff Dixon and the ego and the struggles and all the rest of that, Yeah, and heartbreak, if that happens too, there is still a a a, a um tethered line directly and concretely and absolutely to some mysterious open space of consciousness,
Hmm.
of awakeness, of no self. Um, it's just that I don't, in my own personal, because I had that experience in my process. We didn't go into it, but yes, I woke. I did have I had a part of my awakening process. I did wake up to consciousness. There was a part where the witness consciousness and witness awareness, where that really solidified itself. But I found that that just wasn't good enough. It's like awakening to awareness and consciousness, this empty plane and field that as the source just did not do it for me. I needed it to like arrive, great concept with the waking down teaching with Samuel Bonder. I needed it to go down,
Hmm.
and what I meant by down is I needed it to be right here. And to ground itself right here. That's really what I was what I wanted to. So I found that when I did that, it kind of marries the whole ball of wax. It marries consciousness with body, with mind, ego with no ego, self with no self, all of it. And then once all of that is done and you've arrived here, then you can take the whole kit and caboodle and just chuck it out the window. You don't have to. This is again. This is how it is for me.
Right.
I mean, I'm we're all different. And for me, I was like, I worked, I, again, I, it was a long, hard struggle for me to get up the top of the mountain. Once I got there and I'm here now, it's like, I'm freaking done thinking about it. I want to go fly fishing. Thank you.
On the other hand, you've written a book and you have a couple of
Right.
websites, and
That's right.
you're still quite, and you're doing this interview. You're still
Right.
quite
Yeah.
fascinated with the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, here's, this is, it's like, why am I doing it? Is why, what, it's because there is still like that's a good point you brought up there, and I'm don't deny it at all. I mean, there is still for me like this longing to interact with people and the world in a way that I can do so utilizing 100% of who I am, and I can be myself 100%. It gets tiring to be uh, putting on your Clark Kent outfit all day long. It gets fucking tiring. It's like you just don't want to do that anymore. And so how do you not do that is by doing things like this and writing a book. And it has helped. I was longing for that after awakening, to interact with people where I could just totally be myself 100% and having adult conversations with people like you and I are having right now that um, really, I guess that goes back to the part of like the elements of post-awakening. What happens in the post-awakening, and I have found that that's definitely something for me is that I'm not satisfied not having those types of conversations, and so all of this and my website and my book is a concerted effort towards interacting with the world on for what is me the most satisfying and gratifying level that I can. I mean, I'm not, and I want to get to the impression that I'm poo-pooing any other ways that in my life that I interact with people. I'm not. I mean, it's just I want to have the Quan. You know what the Quan is?
No, but I
Jerry
get.
Maguire.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Well, it's like to use an example, which I don't mean to be offensive to anyone. Let's say you were a kindergarten teacher and you spent
Yeah.
your whole day
Right.
hanging out with 5-year-olds.
Right. Yeah.
You'd want to go and hang out with some adults later
Yeah.
on. And
Yeah.
I'm not sort of comparing quote unquote unenlightened people to 5-year-olds, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. It's like there's a dimension to adult interaction
Right.
in this example, which you're just not going to get with 5-year-olds. And by the same token, you can't really talk about the kind of things you and I are talking about
Right.
with the average person on the street, as delightful as that person may be.
Right.
So you
Right.
want this dimension, and it seems normal enough to me.
And I want to, I mean, not everybody heads in this direction, but having written a book and I have a blog, etc. And again, I've alluded to another website I'm doing, which is Enlightenment Consulting Services. It's like I want to make a living doing this.
Yeah. Hey,
I don't want
me
to.
too.
Yeah, I don't want to like exactly. It's like you want to like once you have that type of fulfilling interaction with people,
Hmm.
you want to align as much of your life with it as you possibly can.
Yeah,
And you
because
know,
it's
so that's
fun. It's gratifying. It's fulfilling. You know,
you
it's stimulating.
you are you're able to be and use all of your of what you have strived to attain for so
Hmm.
many years. You don't want to again go back and hide in your Clark Kent outfit, you know. And so like you know, with um, you know this from interviewing all of your teachers, you know, they all have a, you know, they're doing that same thing. Um, you know, I wrote this book about, you know, I'm a blue collar worker and I have this audio video services company that I operate on a day-to-day basis. But you know, I could easily let that go,
Sure.
and frankly, hope to, you
Hmm.
know, hope to be able to. I'm you know, I'm comfortable being an author. I'm not comfortable being. I don't think it's in the cards for me to be like any some satsang teacher or you know on that sort of scale. That doesn't
Hey.
particularly
But if you
interest me.
play the game of if I won the lottery, what would I be doing? You probably wouldn't be crawling around under people's living
Oh,
room, tables trying to
yeah,
hook up cables. You'd be
right.
doing this kind of stuff and maybe fishing and having
Yeah.
fun, But it's
I,
like,
yeah,
y-
it's like I'm more of a, I have been doing some teaching locally,
mm,
like book signings here and there, and I have these little meetings. I have a meetup group, and it's like a meeting about awakening. And so I'm very comfortable in small groups and one-on-ones, and that's actually what I'd like to do. And if I could, you know, put up my promotion flag for this interview, is that next year I'm going to be marketing a service that is a one-on-one service for individuals who have are very career-driven, high-profile, that might be actors or politicians or stockbrokers that have an interest in spirituality and have an interest in awakening or enlightenment, but they don't know what to do about it, and they're in no position to really publicly do anything about it.
hmm,
And they can afford the services of having someone privately come to their place and be, instead of gallivanting across the country going to see the likes of Adyashanti and um, Gangaji and Arjuna, have that person come to them, you know, over a period of 6 months. And so that's, you know, that's an adult interaction that I'm striving for, is that element. And uh,
yeah.
so,
That sounds
mm,
good. Um, I had a thought earlier that I wanted to hash
yeah.
out with you, which is we were talking about the juxtaposition and the paradox and all that. And
Mm,
if you sort of think of the mass of humanity, the vast majority of people, I suppose, are pretty locked into the perspective that the concrete world is what it appears to be and is real.
mm-hmm.
And then but if you listen to Gallup polls and stuff, then a lot of people have had glimpses or glimmerings of something deeper. There is a deeper reality, and people are fascinated with all this kind of stuff. And there's shows on
Yeah.
TV, and all kinds of things you can watch, psychics and spiritual things, and there's so many religions in the world where people have been sort of making a fuss about there being something that is beyond the obvious,
Mm,
seen reality. And then, we have people like ourselves who've spent decades kind of wanting to actually have an experience of that and have actually attained it to whatever degree. And the tables begin to turn where, you said earlier, now this is really the dominant thing.
mm,
That sort of what used to be something you didn't even believe in,
mm-hmm.
went to something you glimpsed occasionally, and then went to
Mm-hmm.
something that you actually are oriented from. That has
Mm-hmm.
become the dominant reality, and the concrete world is still there, but it's only part of the picture now, not the whole thing. So I don't know. I just found that interesting when we were talking about juxtaposition. How there's this turning of the tables from, you know,
Yeah.
it's a complete 180-degree reversal in a way of
Yeah.
the ordinary orientation to life.
And that's what one wants. Would presume if you begin seeking awakening or get involved in spirituality, you aren't doing it not to change.
Right.
You know, I mean, making the change is is you know is what it's all about, and is the if I could say, that's is the difficult part of actually going through with it.
Hmm.
Of actually stepping through the fire of going through with that process. So it takes some determination. But yeah, if I look back at my total history, and yours as well, Rick, and everybody that is interviewed on Back At, we all start from the same place.
Hmm.
And it is, and this is one of the things that I do not ever hold back on, that that I am not a person who is subtle or shy whatsoever about saying, you know, pardon my French, fucking A, yeah, awakening is a good thing. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I changed. It was well worth the effort. I am absolutely 100%. It was a damn good investment, and it has paid off in
Right.
in spades. So I'm I think people need to hear that. That yeah, it's not there's it's not a you know I, that kind of is like, you want to like tell people that there's an ordinary quality to it, but you also want to give them hope and let them know that, because I mean, people come to this from such a wounded spot, from such an isolated spot, from such a separate from life spot that is painful. And once you kind of like get above the clouds, you tend to forget about that shit. As a teacher, you tend to forget about how, so it's like, it's important to tell those people who are really struggling, who are unhappy, who are suffering, that, yeah, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I had some lady this past summer, I went to gathering with some Waking Down people, and she, like, at the end, she just really needed to hear that. And so I walked up to her, and I just laid it out right there. It's just like, yeah, it is well worth it. There is a light. And she just cried, and just really needed to hear that. And so I hope I'm addressing what you talked about with the juxtaposition of,
I think you are, and I think
am
it's a
I?
good
Yeah.
point that we haven't quite dwelt on enough, perhaps, which is that
Yeah.
this realization business is really sumptuous. I mean, it's really,
Yeah.
it's you use these analogies of light at the end of the tunnel and dangling carrots and whatnot,
Right.
but when you actually do munch on the carrot, it's delicious.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and all this talk in the ancient texts of bliss and so on, so that's real.
Yeah.
It's a,
It is.
and I often think, I mean, if I could have, we were saying earlier how you get used to it and you
Yeah.
acclimate, but I mean, if I could jump from where I was 40 years ago to where
Oh
am
yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
I would probably be just lying on the floor drooling in ecstasy. But I'm accustomed to it.
Right.
And conversely, if I were to jump back to where I was 40 years ago, it would probably kill me, the
Yeah.
agony of the
Yeah.
contrast.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way, Rick. There's parts of it that you get used to, but there are other parts that you don't get used to that still that still floor me. In my meetings with people, a meeting that I have here locally, or when I'm really seriously talking to somebody about spirituality, um, I go into a peak experience,
Hmm.
and
It
the other
heightens it.
day, what's that?
It heightens it.
Yeah,
Even when I do these interviews, I get high as a kite. Just sort of,
yeah.
yeah.
I think a lot of people are prone to that, and
Hmm.
that's goes back to the part of the magic of transference, is that you tend to like go into that space until finally, after doing it enough times, your body gets it.
Right.
But yeah, I still have that, absolutely. I
Hmm.
think probably most teachers do, where they go into that very very heightened state of, as I called in my book, magic something. That is, yeah, it feels great. It absolutely does. It's a wonderful experience to have. What was I going to say about it? Yeah, it's. I was asked to describe it in 3 words or less a couple days ago, and it was like ridiculously relaxed.
That's nice. Yeah.
Um, what else? Yeah, I can't really
That's a
remember,
good
but
one.
but that was
I
that.
like that, ridiculously relaxed. There's a sort of an ease that one
Right.
settles into, and whereas previously there's a sort of a tightness and a constriction
Yeah.
and a control element.
Right.
There's an ease and a flow that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Adida, one of his famous metaphors was, before awakening,
Clenched fist.
and then
Yeah.
after awakening is this, and
Yeah.
that's very true. It's
Mm.
very true. So
I took some notes when I was reading your book, just a few things I thought we might touch
cool.
upon. One was at one point you used the phrase "more please," and I don't remember whether you used it
Right.
with a positive or a negative connotation, but I
Right.
would like to suggest that that's kind of the nature of life, and that's what we were
Yeah.
talking about just now. Really, there is a more please kind of wiring built into us, in which
Yeah.
the mind naturally seeks a field of greater happiness.
Yeah.
And it's like you're an audio guy, right? So if some tinny little $5 radio were playing on one side of the room, and then this $10,000 stereo system started playing on the other, our attention would shift to the $10,000
Yeah.
stereos because it's so much more fulfilling.
More,
So
more please is good.
yeah, it's a good thing.
More please. There's nothing wrong with more please.
And,
But there does come a point that you need to recognize more please. You need to recognize that the mind, is ego mind is the it can compromise and subtly take over the whole ship, and you need to put it in its place. You need to realize that's what mind is up to. More please. Adida called it seeking. You're always seeking. You're always seeking. And seeking meaning that you're seeking happiness, but you're never ever really finally attaining it. Sure, you go from one experience, you get one big car, one big house, one big moment, that you're looking forward to, and it comes and it goes. They all come and they go. And where's the fulfillment? So your mind is going, more please, more please.
yeah,
Can I have more please? I'd
looking
like
for
more
love
please.
in all the wrong places, as the song
Yeah,
goes.
but and so, but you realize that's just that's a limited condition of the mind, and it's a tool, and you work with it. I still got a more pleased mind, hey, I love getting a new fly rod every year. I don't need another one. I just want one more, please. I just want the So
Sure.
there's that element to it that you just accept and are okay with. When it's compromised the total being a ship of your being, and that's all you're living for, and it's the only thing that you got, then that's a problem.
Well, another way of
No.
putting it would be if your more pleased tendency is limited to kind of the surface value of life for
Yeah.
its to operate within,
Right.
then it's never going to be gratified because you can only get so much fulfillment out of a new fly rod. But if the very same tendency that we're talking about is allowed to sort of steer the course of your life to sort of in a vertical direction rather than just horizontal,
Right.
then something interesting begins to happen. And I would suggest that the very same impulse that makes you want to get a new fly rod also made you want to sort of seek spiritual realization.
Yeah.
It's just it got sort of directed in a more in a deeper way.
Right. I mean, it doesn't take much. I mean, everybody
Right.
knows that that the excitement of that new TV or thing is going to wear off. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But we still do it. We still
Not
do it. We still
everybody
want.
does know it. Some people just desperately go for the bigger TV and the bigger car and the bigger
You're right.
boat and the
I
prettier
would.
wife and
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I mean, not everybody does. You're absolutely correct. Maybe on what I'm saying is like on some unconscious level, that everybody knows.
yeah.
On one level, or if you really sat down with somebody and
Talk to
said,
them about it.
yeah,
Sure.
but we still all do it. And I'm the same way. It's like, my wife and I want to live in a bigger house next year, and so
Yeah.
there's that more pleased mind, and I accept it, and I ain't got no problem with it because I know that happiness from that house is, it's great. It's a good thing. And, I look forward to it. But ultimately, that's a condition, and happiness needs to be unconditional.
Yep.
So that's,
Good.
another great, go ahead. Rick.
There's another thing you talked about in the book, identification, being lost in the objects of perception, I believe. And
Jeez, that was me?
I think it was, or did I use the word?
That doesn't sound like nothing I would write. I mean, I ain't that highfalutin fancy.
Maybe I wrote it down based upon something I read in your book, and you said something about being willing to extract yourself from the world or
Okay,
something
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Okay,
And my question when I read that was, is it really a matter of willingness? Is it a really matter of choice? Can it just be done with the snap of a finger, or what? It seems to me that it's probably going to be more of a process than just something you decide to do when you wake up one morning and you're done by lunch.
Yeah, I think what I was alluding to in that was that there is there's a very, very, very scary element to this process, which the ego and the mind picks up on, and that essentially, uh, when I say extract, it's kind of the um, man, it is a tough to speak, but it is the process of differentiating, again, the more pleased mind from the background conscious witness um, uh, uh, being that we
Ground
all
state or
are.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that we all are. And so, but really, what I say about extract, and I mean, it takes a lot. The process of doing that, while easily said, the process of actually really, and this is what I found in my own case, was really daunting. It took a lot of courage. I mean, there were parts of my seeking that just, I was rattled to my core. I was fucking with the fabric of the universe and was in a place that I had no right to be. And Jesus Christ, what had I done?
Mm.
Like I wasn't talking about the death of just Jeff. I was talking about the total death existence of everything. Like I was just like, I had gone into the back machine room of existence and hit the off switch, and like, what the fuck did I do that for, And so, yeah, so that is an element that one needs to be prepared for. That is, you hear this a lot from, the end of your world, Adyashanti, which is a book that he wrote. And Gangaji, any good teachers could tell you about that. That you need to prepare to meet fear. Just like I'm talking about existential depression, there's an element of existential fear that is this gnarly black beast that lives in the mountain that you are going to run into, and it is going to scare the shit out of you. And it, to the point I'm talking about, to the point where you're going to question why you even got involved with spirituality. It's that large of a fear. Now, again, maybe we all experience how this fear hits us and confronts us, and you can have it hit you in small amounts of time, and then over the years, it's not so bad. In my own case, it was like me meeting, this black dragon in the mountain, fire breathing demon that was going to drag my ass to hell. And that's what it was like for me. And man, it was, it took some courage for me to, to consciously go into that. So if that answers your question about
Yeah, it does.
extracting yourself from, I think I said, the quote was extracting myself from the conditions of reality or of Maya or something.
From the world, yeah.
Yeah, I can't really remember, but.
Well, it does answer it, and it brings up an interesting point, which is that I've often wondered about myself, because when people talk about this horrible fear, I think, geez, is this something I'm still going to encounter, because I haven't, and maybe I will, and it's still waiting around the corner for me. But I think that the way I've approached it, having learned to meditate when I was a kid, and stuck with it, is this incremental thing that you mentioned. There's been just sort of a gradual chipping away. So I haven't experienced so many cataclysmic.
Everyone's different.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote in my book. There's a little analogy, a little parable called water, if you remember it, where essentially it starts out with, you are water, frozen, cold, hard, ice, and then what happens in the awakening process is that you begin to melt. You go sit with teachers, it causes you to melt, and so chunks of ice start to come off. And that's a very uncomfortable process. The melting process is a very uncomfortable process for a lot of us. For others, it can be like gradually. Maybe in your case, Rick, it's just little drips, over the span of 20 or 30 years. In my own case, I think a lot of people experience just a large chunk will fall off.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable. That gets to be uncomfortable. But there's no telling, what anyone's process or path is going to be like when that happens. We all melt in different ways, and you just have to allow the melting. And also, as a teacher or someone who's working with somebody to facilitate awakening, you have to acknowledge that they're going to be different. But you do have to, like, if you're writing a book or you do have a practice or a teacher, that if you want to, you do have to kind of, like, you have to establish some sort of structure, some sort of guidelines that okay, here's what I think it'll probably be like for you, more than likely, in other words. And I think that's sort of what I've done with my book and what I
Yeah.
do on my blog. It's like, I'm guessing this is how it was like for me. Like, this is why I always like to think that, like, I'm a pretty like, an average, middle class white American guy, and so I'm thinking that I'm nobody extraordinary. I wasn't born into a great spiritual family or wealthy family or famous family. I'm not from India. I didn't, the stars weren't in my perfect alignment. I'm just a normal dude. And so I got into these matters, and I'm thinking, because of that foundation, that probably the course that I took and the awakening that I've realized is probably, like, what I like to call, is probably pretty blue collar awakening, is grocery store enlightenment. So I think that a lot of the facets of kind of what I went through are going to, I'm assuming, again, because of my normal background, that I bet a lot of people would experience it, at least in some ways, in the way that I did.
Hmm.
Um, who knows for
Yeah, no,
sure,
it's true.
but
I
it's,
mean,
yeah,
everybody is unique, but there are definitely some similar patterns, and
yeah,
probably a lot of people's patterns might. In fact, I know, having talked to a lot of people, that a
yeah,
lot of them do match yours or resemble yours anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
There's one other thing for your book that maybe we just touch on, and it
sure.
might lead us to a conclusion. You use the example of the Chilean miners who were trapped in the
Hmm.
mine,
Yeah.
and then they were freed. And I forget the exact context in which you used it, but when I read it, I thought, okay, well, once you've been freed from the mine, then what?
Hmm.
Maybe you expressed that thought, but I have it written down here, and that. What you want to riff on that a little bit? What you meant to say with that example?
Well, sure. It's while I wrote when I was writing 21 Days, which is the 21 days after I kind of kicked the last little grain of doubt off of my awakening seeking. One of the days was when the Chileans miners were trapped, and we got them out. And so there was they got them all out. It was awesome. And so then for about a period of about a week, they were famous. In other words, they had been freed from their captivity, and
Mm.
then they were. Then I thought, well, what's going to happen to these poor schmucks after their 15 minutes? They after they were freed, and I thought there was a very uh, apt kind of analogy towards awakening. It's except in this case, when you wake up, there's nobody there to congratulate you for the most part. There's nobody there, to hand you a diploma or to congratulate you. You aren't getting up in front of 1,000 people and they're saying, "Oh, it's so great that you were freed." There's this like, now what? you know Now again, we're all different, and in my own case, I was like, I need my relief would had arrived to a level of relief and well-being, that it was kind of a funny circumstance. I realized that my circumstance was much like those miners, where I was like, okay, so except even without the fanfare that they had, for the week or so after they were freed, it's like, so now you're awake, and it's like, now what? And so, like the miners, I was wondering what has become of those miners? What are they doing? And another way to look at it is I often look at it this way, that it's as if um, I'm playing a video game like Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. And I love using this analogy because Jed McKenna, in his books, in one of his books, played Tomb Raider. It's like, okay, so you've killed all the bad guys. You've gotten all the little golden, star cookies and rewards and whatnot. And so, but there's this feeling that, and this is how it is for me. It's not like this for everybody. I feel like I'm still in the video game. I'm still in the video game, and now what do? All the bad guys are killed.
Mm.
I've been freed from the mine. Now what do I do? And so I guess that's what it was about. Was I was kind of questioning that on that particular day. And I remember I was like, I walked. There's a, yeah, there's a quality though, like you have woken up, just like, well, damn, what do I'm still here. What am I going to do with this? And yeah, that's part of the post-awakening, a very big part of the post-awakening process is like, now what am I going to do with my life, and how am I going to orient it towards this awakening, and what am I going to do with it, and how do I want to, there's this, for me, it's like this subtle, not so subtle actually, this is how it manifests for me. It's like there's this quality, like I have just surmounted the biggest damn mountain I have ever surmounted. And if I can do that, if I can do that, then I can, I'm free and I can do anything. So that's kind of how that's how it kind of is for me. It's not.
I think
I'm
that's
still
what I
saying,
was. Yeah, I think that's what
yeah,
I was alluding to earlier. When I don't know if I used this phrase, but I kind of see awakening as a milestone, not a
yeah,
destination.
right,
And there's always going to be. It's paradoxical again to use that word. There's always going to be a next horizon, and yet there isn't. But there's always there's a
yeah,
certain finality to it, but at the same time there's always going to be something yet to discover, something yet to do, something yet to explore.
yeah,
And so if I'm right about that, then it might be helpful for people to realize that you don't just rest on your laurels and sit around and have somebody drop grapes in your mouth. It's a stage,
mm,
and yet there's plenty of room left for exploration once that stage has been reached, and you'll cross that bridge when you come to it.
yeah. I mean, the it's kind of in my own case, it's like like I feel like I'm the milestones that I'm looking for are materialistic or on kind of on a surface level, but I married to um, a uh, married to an element of wanting to assist people.
Hmm.
There's that's what I found. It's like, okay, so now you're in the video game, you've killed all the bad guys, and what's there left to do? Well, you just help other players.
Mm.
You help other players who are lost in the video game. You show them what to do, how to do it, and how to get to the end of it. And then after they win the game, then they're helping other players too. And I think that's maybe what happens. It's
It's
not
yeah, it's
not for
what happens for a
everybody.
lot of people,
Yeah,
and I think it's natural, just like we were saying before, the
yeah,
natural tendency of the mind, of how you put it, the wanting more and more.
yeah,
There's a kind of a natural, that phrase in the Bible, "My cup runneth over." It's like
yeah,
at a certain point, the cup is full. You can stop worrying about filling the cup,
yeah.
but now it's going to start overflowing, and
Right.
that takes the form of wanting to assist others.
Yeah. I mean, and so yeah, I've not arrived to that point. I'm new. I'm early on in this. I'm just now beginning to figure out exactly what that is, between website and book and consulting services to privately to individuals. Is like, um, you know I can tell you that that's kind of like what's on the next horizon for me, and beyond that, I really don't know.
Yeah.
Which might be maybe a good thing to expand on just a little bit. Is like living in the moment and now.
Hmm.
You hear a lot about that, and that's also can be a confusing element of this, where the power of now by Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass, Be Here Now. There's a lot of extraordinary amounts of talk about being here now. And I think a lot, and what I want to say is I think a lot of it is hyped. Because my mind is totally capable, and often is fantasizes, about what's it going to be like in the future. It still does that. Um, it's still like, I'm hoping to like have to move next year to a larger house. and I hope next year to have a consulting service, and I hope
And
to
you
sell
got to
more
plan
books.
all that, right?
Y-
It's not, you're not just
Right.
going to wake up one morning and find yourself in a larger house.
Yeah, so a lot of people think that being here now is just like, I'm just gonna after this interview, I'm just gonna walk upstairs and go out and sit in a chair and be here now and not do anything. And just but it isn't really like that. There is a absolutely there's a quality to, to in the when you have more of the peak experience subtle sides of awakening. When you go into this, there's absolutely you're like here now. You're like grounded, and it's and but then because the activities of the more pleased mind recede to the background.
Well, it's like we were saying earlier about how if one is only locked into the surface level of life and one's
Hmm.
whole fulfillment is dependent upon that, then
Yeah.
it's very you know vulnerable to the waves of change.
Yeah.
I don't know if we put it in those phrases, but
Yeah.
with regard to this now thing, if one is locked into the surface level of experience, then there's a lot of sort of neurotic worrying about the future and lamenting about the past and so on. But
Yeah.
when the deeper dimension dawns, then one is in the now,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that you can't plan to get a bigger house or a better
Right.
job, or you can't
Right.
think about
Right.
the fun you had in high school, or
Right. Right.
you can play in the past and future, but there's a sort of a nowness that becomes more predominant, so your whole fulfillment isn't invested in
Yeah.
these future past things. It's primarily grounded in the now, in presence.
Yeah. It's this the I think a lot of people who are striving for awakening have this fantasy that being here now means that's all you need. Whatever's in front of you immediately
Yeah.
is all that you need and is totally fulfilling and is the end game. And that's just not true.
Right.
That's just not true. Unless you're Ramana Maharshi or some yogi on a mountaintop, which we're not, which I'm not, no, I'm not stupid, I'm not gonna, I want good things, I want um, intelligent things. I want intelligent interaction. I want wiser directions to go in. I want to make plans. You do not being here. It's almost it's like people think that being here now is like some sort of lobotomy, where you're like, you're reduced to some, juvenile version of yourself who's totally satisfied with, completely whatever's in front of him, even if it's just a pen. It's just the most glorious, unified universal pen in my whole entire life. Well, let me blow that notion out of the water, and say, fuck that, man. I want a bigger fishing pole and a bigger house. Yeah, because you're not, you don't get a lobotomy. If anything, you become more intelligent, more, look, the opposite of that is someone like Osho, 14 Rolls Royces, or someone like Adi Da.
90 something.
What's that?
He had
90?
90
Was it
something.
90? Yeah.
90
I mean,
something, yeah.
there's a guy who had a refined sense of taste, and that happens. Yeah, that happens. There's a quality to awakening that you're no longer, you no longer, it's like you're here, you're now, you live in this world, and you don't settle for bullshit. You don't, if something stinks, you're going to say it stinks. You're not holding back. You're not, you are not, you have no, pretense or agenda or fear about calling things like the way they are. And in some sense, you could become more of an opinionated asshole than you were before awakening. And take all of that with temperament and as and align that with being here mutually in the world with other beings, and have a sense of respect and regard for other people, and you can be those things.
Hmm.
You can have that integrity of in your life, and that not get in the way and get ridiculous, to the point of 90 Rolls Royces. You can have it naturally and in a well-rounded way. And I think that's how I feel about my own case. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that element of awakening, is wanting the finer things in life. Or it just cannot be confused with the finer things of life, thinking that that's going to be the fulfilling things in life. And I have lost my train of thought.
Well, I'll help you out. Uh, it's just it's the kind of theme we've been playing around with, which is that um, if you're just caught up in the waves, then it really matters whether the waves are big or
Yeah,
small, fast or slow, green or red, or whatever. Their whole fulfillment is invested in how things are going on the surface of life,
yeah.
and if you kind of opened yourself up to use clunky words to the full range of the ocean,
Hmm.
then you're the ocean, and fine. If there's big waves, little waves, doesn't matter a heck of a lot. So this whole be here now thing, and it's
Yeah,
yeah.
it gets a little blown out of proportion, you know.
Yeah, and I would think what people should, and it's not a mood, this be here. You,
Mm.
you can't like mood make yourself into just being in the present and everything is content, because if that contentment isn't really explored and unfolded, discovered,
Mm.
then you're just going to be sort of passive and
Yeah.
perhaps apathetic. So there really needs to be that deeper dimension, and then on the foundation of that, you can be as dynamic and as goal oriented and
Hmm.
as you want to be.
Yeah.
There's no conflict, even though there's some paradox in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I while you were speaking there, I was,
Got your train of thought.
yeah, no, yeah. No, I was thinking it's just I want to, well, because I think we're getting close to the end here, and I really want to address or I really want to like acknowledge for viewers who you know who come to Batgap and are are suffering and are in pain, and that are kind of going a little further than the or going a little, or have arrived at a deeper place, a deeper sort of dark night of the soul. Because I remember the years that I was there, and yeah, I think that because I think that's what Batgap is for. It's for those individuals. It's what my book is for. It's what my websites and what it kind of what happens to you when you do want to turn around and teach this is you want to talk to those people that were like you, that were really really suffering. And so there's um I'm just trying to remember, like, hey man, if I came to this website and was listening to all these interviews and um and I was feeling that, I know that I'm thinking, well, that's all great. I'm really happy for you and your fly rods and blah 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 and your own awakening, and who gives a shit, you know? Yeah, but what can I do? This sucks, and what can I do right now to end what I'm feeling here, this suffering and this separation? And that is a good question. And that is the heart of the matter. And I think what I want to say to those people is that that's what you have to, first and foremost, is that you need to accept that. Is that you don't deny that, accept that that's where you are and start from there. And that's totally okay, and it's totally part of the process. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And what can you do? Is to to read and to watch and to be with as many teachers as you possibly can. And I know there's a lot of people out there who might be in, geez, you know, far corners of the world who don't have that opportunity. Then you need to accept that that's where you are, and orient your life, or orient as much as you possibly can towards taking the steps that puts you closer in uh, to proximity, written words or video or in my personal opinion, the best thing that you can do is to be with those people, is to orient your life so that you can do that, so you can sit in it, and have that exposure to those types of people who are awake. That's the process. Yeah, and big part of that process is coming to terms with that difficulty and that uncomfortableness and that suffering that you're having right now, and accepting it and sinking into it, not denying it, but as Samuel Bonder and his great organization says, of waking down into it. Um, and then doing that um, as much as you can with and in the company of other awakened teachers. And it's contagious.
Yeah.
Awakening is contagious. And so I just, for me, it's like, that's who, if I could like look back at Jeff like 10 years ago, that's what I would say. It's like, yeah, damn, man, I feel your pain. It fucking sucks, And I'm not, I'm not denying it. It sucks, and it gets tiring to hear from awakened teachers how great it is and blah blah blah. You just don't care, you know. And I was with you. I did not at that point. I didn't care either, because it was all about this and this pain that was right here. So the path that I took, which is the only path that I can, teach and recommend to others, is one that worked for me. I think it works for a lot of the teachers here at BATCAP, is to immerse yourself in this world as much as you can, however limited that might be, or as great as that might be, and you will find that if you allow and you accept and you are able to be as honest as you possibly can with every part of you that's coming up during that interaction, you will find that you slowly begin to turn the tables on that element, which is the depressing elements, which are the separate elements, or which are the ones that make you suffer. So I mean, that's what I, as somebody who writes a book about this and has gone through the awakening process, that's what I want to say to all those people. And I think that's what your website is about too, Rick, is like really going down to that parts, acknowledging everybody who comes here, that wounded part in all of us, that's, that's right where it's at. Go right. That's what our job is to take you right there to that edge, against that pain and that wound, and hold you up against the fire until you slowly heat up and you start melting, and you find that there is a healing that takes place, and there is a rediscovery of well-being. But our job is to like hold your ass against that fire. And I think that so that's kind of like what I wanted to say at the end here, Rick, is that you're doing a really good job of that with these videos that you have online. And I think every teacher that comes to you is really, that's the most important thing that they're giving, and that's what I want to give, is that, is the acknowledgement that that can be done, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and
And it's not
I
an
wish you well.
oncoming train.
And it's not an oncoming train. Exactly.
Yeah.
Very,
Good. Well, that was beautiful. Nice wrap up.
sure.
Okay, so let me just make a few concluding remarks.
Okay.
I've been talking with Jeff Dixon, or Jeff Stewart Dixon to be more formal, and Jeff has written a book and has a couple of websites, and we'll have another website pretty soon. I'll be linking to all of that from batgap.com. So if you just happen to be listening to this in audio while you're in the car or something, you don't need to remember, or don't have a car accident trying to write down domain names, just go to batgap.com. You'll see Jeff's interview, and you can click on links to go to his websites and his book. You'll also see there all the other interviews I've done, and they're all archived, and there's a kind of an index on the right-hand side of the page. It's alphabetical of all the people. And there's a little link there that you can click on to sign up for an email notification every time a new interview gets put up. That's pretty simple to do. Every day people sign up. We're also there's a chat group that builds around each interview, and usually anywhere from 1 to 500 comments get made after each interview in that particular chat area of that interview. There's also a general comment section that has thousands of comments that have accumulated over time. But we're actually going to turn that into a forum, so it's more topical and easier to navigate. So it's not just this linear train of unrelated points. So that'll be coming soon. There's also a Yahoo group called Buddha at the Gas Pump, which is quite lively and active. So if you look on the Yahoo groups for Buddha at the Gas Pump, you'll find that, and I have a link to it on my site. And finally, there is a donate button, and I do appreciate people clicking that from time to time. There are some spiritual websites which sort of require payment for access. I never want to do that with this. I hope to always keep it free for everybody, and to just have enough people out there watching and feeling inclined to donate that I can generate enough income to not only keep doing it, but as Jeff was saying earlier, eventually make this a full-time gig.
And the minimum donation is $1 million.
Right.
Just that's the minimum.
Yeah, for that I'll take a trip to Greece with you and we can hang out. Okay, so I think that about covers it. So thanks for listening or watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Rick. Bye-bye.
I should say that next time is going to be Anita Moorjani. I should never announce next time because a lot of times things change, but she was a very interesting woman who had a near-death experience. She was like in a coma, severe cancer, about to check out, had a profound experience, came back, her cancer went away. So, and she's doing real well these days. So that's going to be a fascinating discussion.
And it's Justin Bieber after that, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the Biebs. All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure. Thanks, Rick.
Bye-bye.